All right, I think we can go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today and welcome to our NCARB Live. My name is Rashawn Seaborn. I'm the Manager of International Relations here at NCARB, and I'll be moderating today's session. During our time together, we will be learning more about the updates to our Canada, Mexico, and United States Trinational Agreement. These updates were recently launched earlier this month. So on today's webinar, we will be hearing from three experts that helped draft this agreement. We have Patricia Romallo, Christy Doyle, and Luis Enrique Lopez Correal. They'll be sharing a brief presentation followed by a Q&A portion afterwards. So please type your questions in the Q&A section throughout the presentation, and we'll try our best to get through as many as we can before the end of the hour. One last housekeeping rule that I'll touch on before we begin. This webinar does have the ability to provide Spanish captions. So to enable them, you can look at the bottom of your screen. There should be a bar that says captions. So if you click that button, hopefully the translation button is toggled on. If not, please click that and you should be able to select your speaking language as well as the language that the captions show up in. So again, at the bottom of your screen, please click captions, turn the translation button on if it's not already, select your speaking language, and in addition, please select the language that your caption should be showing up in. Okay, I think that's all the housekeeping items for now. So at this time, I'd love to hear from our panelists before we get started and have them introduce themselves so we can learn a little bit more about their role and the organization that they're here representing today. So why don't we start off with Patricia, followed by Christy, and then Luis Enrique.
Hi, I'm Patricia Romallo. I am part of the international teams at NCARB. We are the team that is charged with seeking opportunities for mutual recognition of credentials. So if you're an architect in one place, to become an architect in another place outside the US. And we collaborate with a representative from the licensing boards and organizations that facilitate licensure across the world.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to NCARB for inviting me to participate in today's webinar on behalf of the Regulatory Organizations of Architecture in Ontario, which we also refer to as ROAC or ROAC. My name is Christy Doyle, and I am the Executive Director of the Ontario Association of Architects, where I've served in a variety of roles for actually more than 3 decades. And so I'm here in sort of 2 capacities. In my role as Executive Director of the OAA, I'm responsible for overseeing the daily management and operation of the association, and that includes financial and human resources, as well as things like national and international relations. And in my role at the OAA, I also support council and strategic decision-making, as well as policy analysis and development. And so I'm also a member of the OAA's member jurisdiction representative to ROAC, and I sit on the Administrators Advisory Committee as well as the Trinational MRA Monitoring Committee, and it's really in that capacity that I join you today and to represent ROAC.
Thank you, Mrs. Seaborn. I am Luis Enrique Lopez Cardiel, Mexican architect. Currently, I have the honor of participation as Executive Coordinator of the Mexican Committee for the International Practice of Architecture. The COPIAR was established by the Mexican government to be responsible for the negotiation regarding the international practice of foreign architects in Mexico and Mexican architects abroad. COPIAR is a committee co-chaired by FICAR, which is the organization that represents the Mexican Architect Registers or the College of Architects in Mexico, and ASINEA, which is the organization of school and institution for teaching architecture in Mexico. COPIAR has an advisors like AMPADE, which is the organization that accredits the architecture programs. CONAR, which is the Certificate Architects and has the support of different institutions of the federal governments. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia, Christy, and Luis Enrique. We're all really excited to have you here today. So I think it'd be really great to set the tone of the conversation and to give a little bit more context by asking, why is the trinational MRA important for Canadian and Mexican architects? And Christy, if we want to start with you, and then Luis Enrique will give you an opportunity to answer as well.
Sure, thanks, Rashawn. That's I'd be happy to do that. And I think I would suggest that we feel strongly and there's great importance to this agreement from actually two perspectives. One from these perspectives of architects, but also the perspective of the Canadian regulators. And so, we're really pleased with the most recent updates that we've made to the agreement, which further remove barriers to licensure while we're continuing to improve mobility for licensed architects so that they can perform their work in our three countries. And then from the perspective of the regulators, public safety continues to be obviously of paramount importance. And while we've appropriately improved the path for architects to practice in other jurisdictions, we feel really strong, this agreement continues to maintain the appropriate measures that ensure the protection of the public interest and to make sure it's safeguarded and that we continue to design and build a very safe, healthy environment for society.
Thank you again. I believe that in addition to that comment, Christy, we offer in regional opportunities. This is very important. But one of the main reasons is that this agreement is help to build a legal system on international practice. This is very important because normally in each country we have so many activity in the illegal process. I think that this is one of the best and the most important activities. Thank you.
Thank you. And so with that, I'll pass it off to Patricia to start us off today with the presentation. As a reminder, the Q&A will be open the entire time, so please feel free to put your comments there.
Thank you, Rishan. So let's get started with a quick overview of what does the Canadian-Mexico-US Trinational Agreement look like today. This has been an agreement, that has been active. It was signed in 2005, so it has been available for almost 15, 20 years. However, last year, we had the opportunity to meet, as you can see the picture, to meet with representatives from the two countries to identify some of the barriers that the agreement was setting without really being connected to architecture. This is something that NCARB, it's an action that NCARB is pursuing for all of its programs, and we are extremely happy to have a partnership with Mexico and Canada and their regulators to pursue this search for reducing those barriers. And so some of the changes for this second amendment, so it's an amendment to the agreement that has been active for a while. It's after the new amendment that launched last week, the post-licensure experience requirements and location restrictions, so the requirements about experience have been reduced, still maintaining, of course, the rigor to safeguard the health, safety, and welfare. Architects who are licensed through various routes are able to benefit from the agreement. And this means, for instance, that regardless of how you obtain the NCARB certificate for U.S. architects, you would be able to benefit from this agreement. The only exception is if you obtain a license in the U.S. through another mutual recognition agreement. But everyone else, if you pursue it for an architect path or if you are educated abroad and had your education evaluated to obtain an NCARB certificate, if you had a NAB accredited degree or not accredited education, all of those pathways actually are able to benefit. And the same goes for Canadian architects. If they obtain their license through any of the pathways that the Canadian territories and provinces offer, they can also benefit from the agreement. Mexico at the moment has the one pathway. So for now, that is what the beneficiaries would be any person who has a license in Mexico. Then we also removed the requirement of citizenship and lower the cost, so the fees tied to the agreement. I'll go into detail in a second, but first I wanted to touch at very high level how each of the countries and each of our organizations are slightly different, but still we all have the same mission. So NCARB, the National Council of Architectural Registration Boards, our mission is to safeguard health, safety, and welfare of the public. And we do this by facilitating the programs and developing and facilitating the programs that the person who wants to become an architect has to go through. We are a membership organization, so we represent the 55 licensing boards in the United States. Those are the 50 states and some territories, and the territories. So once each of these licensing boards is important to keep in mind because it's slightly different from other countries. Each of these licensing boards has the right to set their own requirements, and NCARB streamlines this process. However, you still need to have a license in the jurisdiction where where your project is. So it doesn't matter if you're sitting in one place, the license is tied to where your project is, which means where you're practicing architecture. Christy, could you tell us a little bit about Canada?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Patricia. And I'm happy to take just a couple of minutes to introduce today's participants to the Regulatory Organizations of Architecture in Canada. And as I said before, we refer to ourselves as ROAC. And also just to explain a little bit about how the practice of architecture is regulated in Canada. And so, as you'll note on the slide, ROAC is the signing or the signatory organization on behalf of Canada to this particular agreement. And ROAC represents the 11 provincial and territory regulators of the profession of architecture in Canada. These regulatory bodies are responsible for setting the standards of entry into the profession and for issuing either registration or licensing to those who meet the established standards of qualification and also of practice. And so it is these 11 regulators that individually regulate the practice of architecture so that the public interest can be protected within their respective territory and or province, very similar to the state licensing boards in the United States. And so just a little bit more detail, the ROAC Board of Directors is comprised of one representative from each of the 11 provincial and territorial regulators. And it's through ROAC that the Canadian architectural regulators directly and collectively work to develop and adopt things like nationally recognized standards and programs that meet our collective regulatory responsibilities, and as well as to look at the needs of the architectural profession. And so it's through this work that it includes the development, the negotiation, and the implementation of mutual recognition agreements with other jurisdictions that have similar requirements in terms of competency to practice architecture that is in the public interest, as well as similar programs for criteria for licensure. And so at the ROAC level, as a group, engaging all of the regulators, we work to establish these mutual recognition agreements. And through that, we're able to build the buy-in and seek recognition of each individual MRA by each member jurisdiction. And this is important for me to say, just because I can confirm, well, there's two things. We are regulated individually within each of the province or territories. And through that, they also control their provincial or territorial legislation. They control the title architect as well in Canada. And it's important to note as well that ROAC itself does not carry any regulatory or licensing authorities or responsibilities. And so this way that we're structured, which I know is a little bit different from the others, but through this, our internal processes for negotiation and implementation of mutual recognitions, I can confirm that all 11 architectural regulators in Canada are signatories to the agreement, which means they recognize it. And so if someone has successfully completed the trinational process, they are eligible to apply for licensure in any of the 11 jurisdictions in Canada. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. And Luis Enrique, could you tell us about Mexico?
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, to be an architect in Mexico, first you must to obtain a professional degree from a higher education institution, of course, for a school, accredited school. And later, you must receive a cédula profesional from the federal government or the Secretaría de Educación Pública, or in other case, from the different state governments. That is the most short answer of this. I think that with this is short but very clear.
Thank you so much. Let's go dive into the eligibility requirements. So to be able to participate or to benefit from the agreement, you need to be licensed in one of the jurisdictions in one of the 3 countries that participate, and in good standing. That means disciplinary sanctions will need to be reviewed, but in general, it's better if you don't have any. And you have to have 5 years of experience post-licensure. This means after you have obtained your license, you have to have 5 years after that, 2 of which have to be as an architect in responsible control in your home country. The remaining 3 can take place in any of the 3 countries. If you start, for instance, in Mexico and you're licensed in Mexico, the first 2 years need to be in responsible control in your home country. And then the other 3, you could still just count 5 years in Mexico, or you could use the remaining 3 in any of the United States or Canada. You have to have a degree in architecture from AMPARE, NAB, or CACB, or an equivalent recognized as one of the pathways for licensure. In our case, that would be for an architect path, Canada as well, for an educated path for the US, education alternatives. So except if you have come through another mutual recognition agreement. For instance, we have agreements with Australia. If you already use the agreement from Australia to get a license in the United States, you would not be eligible to participate. But all of the other pathways are, which is very exciting because it opens up so many opportunities. If for those architects who are licensed in the United States, you will need an NCARB certificate. And if you are licensed in Mexico, you will need a CONARC certificate. Of course, like any other architect in any of our 3 countries and many other countries, you have to meet, once you're licensed, you have to meet the requirements set by the jurisdiction. You have to comply with laws and regulations, continuing education requirements, professional conduct and ethics. And that is, you have to be a professional, an architect, and behave as an architect based on the requirements and laws and regulations set by the jurisdiction. And by jurisdiction, I mean, I just want to make it clear because it's part of a word that NCARB uses a lot. Jurisdiction is one of those states or territories that we have 55 with a licensing board. So states or territories with a licensing board. The fees, as I mentioned before, they have been lowered. The total fee is $3,500, so $3,500 US dollars. And this payment is split in 3 parts. The first part will be $500 that is payable once the application has been accepted. The second part will be the dossier review. Once the dossier that I'll mention that is part of the requirements has been accepted, you will have to pay $2,000, and the remaining $1,000 it's payable after the completion of the review of the dossier and when we are about to set the interview, to schedule the interview. So what does it take to successfully complete the mutual recognition agreement through the tri-national agreement? The first step is always review your eligibility. I mentioned at a high level the requirements in our website and any of our websites. You have a lot more information, but that is the base. What I just mentioned is the base. Review that. And one thing that is worth mentioning, Christy said at the beginning that Canada, the 11 provinces and territories of Canada accept the agreement. In the US, especially if you're located in the US, you're familiar already with each of the 55 jurisdictions has the right to set their own requirements, which means that includes actually also accepting the different programs that NCARB develops. So one of the things you need to look at when you're starting, if you're licensed in the US to be eligible, you will have to be licensed in one of those jurisdictions that accept that its participant participates in the agreement. If you are seeking licensure, so on the other hand, if you're seeking licensure, you're a Canadian or a Mexican architect and you're seeking licensure in the US, the first thing is to first understand where you're trying to get licensed. You will have to choose one of the 55 jurisdictions, and that jurisdiction has to be a participant to the agreement. Once you figure out that this is the best path for you, you will be contacting the organization that it's in your home country. As a US architect, I will be contacting NCARB. Canadian architects need to contact Chris's team, and Luis Enriquez architects in Mexico will need to contact CONARC, and we'll give the contact information at the end. Once you will work with the home organization to fill out your application, the home organization is going to review, make sure that you're eligible. And once everything looks okay, they'll send this documentation to the host organization. The host organization, this is an important term to understand when you're reading about agreements. Home is the location where you got your initial license. Host is the organization where you're seeking licensure. So the host organization will receive your documents sent by the home organization. They'll make sure everything looks okay, of course, and they'll work with you to develop the dossier to demonstrate that you have competencies to practice architecture independently in the country where you're seeking licensure. This dossier is reviewed by a panel of architects, volunteer architects from representing the countries where you're seeking licensure. And if everything looks good, we will be scheduling an interview that is conducted now virtually with the panel that has reviewed your dossier. And if successfully completed, you'll be able to obtain a license in the country where you're seeking licensure. If that's the case of the United States, it would be in one of those jurisdictions where you are that is participant to the agreement. If you are from the United States, and going to Mexico, for instance, Mexico will be issuing a CONARC certificate. So Mexican and US architects going through the agreement will first be issued a CONARC certificate, and with that CONARC certificate, they will be getting support to get a license in Mexico. On the other way, in the other direction, if you're coming to the United States, after completion of the process, you will be getting an NCARB certificate. And with that NCARB certificate, you'll be able to seek licensure in one of the jurisdictions that participates in the agreement. Now going into detail, I mentioned a dossier and an interview. And I want to stop here and note that I did not mention, if you're in the United States, AXP. So I did not mention an experience program that is structured. I did not mention the ARE, the Architect Registration Exam. This is all, this is the process that I'm mentioning is all it takes. You demonstrate your experience and your competency through the dossier and the interview. For the dossier, the competencies that you need to show that you have obtained are outlined by the agreement. And of course, they are public and available to you when you're developing the agreement. You have to present a minimum of 3 projects for each of the 3 competency areas that you have to address. The projects have to be, it can be located in any of the 3 countries. They don't have to be only in your home country. You can use a mix of different project types or different locations, anything that will allow the review panel and to understand that the competencies that you have obtained as an architect. If you were in the case that if you're showing projects that are not in your country where you're licensed and are an architect, that means that you are probably working under the supervision, or you should be working under the supervision of an architect in the other 2 countries, which means that this person will be signing an attestation indicating that they worked with you in that project and they're attesting your role in the project. United States architect will be very familiar with this because it's an iteration or a different format to what if you were documenting an architectural experience program, AXP, you know that your supervisor has to sign off on your experience. In this case, there's a form that the supervisor has to sign. And you will be showing projects to demonstrate experience in those competency areas. And using graphics and descriptions to demonstrate it. So to facilitate the understanding of the competencies and your experience for the review panel. We will work in advance. The host organization will work in advance with you to make sure that the content it's what the review panel will be looking at. And then, of course, if the review panel has questions, we'll be working with you to make sure that you are able to answer the questions. If you are successful in demonstrating your competency, you will be invited to an interview that is conducted by the same review panel. And during this interview, you will be talking about your role and participation in the projects that you submitted. And an important part is you will need to share your understanding and knowledge about the codes and how codes and professional conduct, how to behave as an architect in the location where you are seeking licensure. You will have access to your dossier during the interview. That's actually the only document you have access to. But so it is not a memory test. We just want to understand and have a conversation, just like you would have it with a client, for instance. Important thing to note is that all of the documentation that you are submitted from the application to the dossier and the interview will be conducted in the language of the host country. That means if you are from Mexico seeking licensure in Canada or the United States, it will be in English. If you are from Canada or the United States seeking licensure in Mexico, it will be in Spanish. And the level of proficiency in the other language needs to be enough that you can work as an architect, basically. You can communicate your ideas, communicate with your client, and transmit information safely. Now, because NCARB has this specific situation in which licensing boards may participate or not, we have a list in our website, in NCARB's website, with the jurisdictions that have chosen to participate in the agreement. Right now, our Council Relations team is working diligently to contact all 55 jurisdictions and make sure that we have up-to-date information regarding the jurisdictions that are able to accept to participate in this agreement. And an important resource is, of course, the manual. This is available for free. You can download it from the NCARB website, and right now it's available in English, but in a few days it will be also available in French and in Spanish. And here you will find a lot of information, everything you need to know to be able to participate in the agreement. And we get to the end. One takeaway is the first step is contacting the organization in the country where you are initially licensed. That would be NCARB if you are licensed in the United States. You have on the screen the email address where you can send us your questions. And please do add in the subject line, Train National MRA. Christy, what's the best way to contact your organization?
Thanks, Patricia. Yeah, I'm happy to elaborate on that a little bit more because it is actually a little bit, hopefully not confusing, but there's obviously a connection between ROAC and the Ontario Association of Architects. And so you've done an excellent job of outlining the application and the eligibility and the dossier preparation process. And those are the foundational principles we know, and they're the same for all three countries. But I do want to mention just a couple of things in terms of who to contact if you're Canadian heading towards licensure in Mexico or the US via the trinational, but also if you're heading our way for licensure in Canada through the trinational agreement. And as I said, it's important to note that, and you'll see by the contact information that the Ontario Association of Architects, on behalf of ROAC, provides the secretariat and the administrative support to the trinational agreement. So if your starting point is searching for general information within Canada about the trinational agreement, and that may be because you're from one of the other jurisdictions, or if you're a Canadian or within the country, within Canada, the information is included on the OA's website. And it's also included on our ROAC website. We're just in the process of doing some updating for ROAC. Some of the individual regulators in Canada may also have information posted. However, we're really moving towards streamlining this so that the main point of contact or the main information would be available through ROAC, but I'll go further to say that we're actually really streamlining, because what we're going to be doing is really just providing basic information, but linking to the information that Patricia's talked about. Thank you. NCARB's done a lot of work in terms of pulling together our collective agreement around process and all of the details of the agreement. So in fact, we will provide links to the information that resides on NCARB's website, which is really all in that great manual. You just saw that cover sheet and the table of contents for the manual. So that's your go-to for information. But as I said, if you if you're a licensed architect in Canada and you're looking to avail yourself of the trinational agreement, please do contact the OEA Administrator of License, and that position is currently Camelia Boston is our Administrator of License at the OEA. She's in the Office of the Registrar, and she is the main point of contact on behalf of ROAC, and she can refer you to information as needed or to help you start the process if that's indeed what you're planning on doing. So again, information's on the website, but if you are just interested or not sure where to look, please do feel free to contact Camelia. And if you're looking for the information that's on our website, if you click on the licensing and registration tab of our website, you'll go into international credentials and mobility, and that's where you should be able to find the information.
Thank you. Luis Enrique, advice for Mexican architects? You are still muted.
Thank you, Patricia. I think that the best way to contact is to go to the CONARC in the window, you can see the website, the email, but also you can check the website of the FECARM, doc.org, doc.mx/CONARC. Or if you have any other idea, you can visit the webpage of NCARB, of course, and with all these contacts, we can answer any question that you can ask for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, there has been really an effort to streamline the process, not only regarding eligibility, but also regarding the process itself and making sure that the information you may need is available to everyone and it's the same, it's all aligned. So that is it for now. Rishon, if you want to take over, we'll be happy to answer questions.
Yes, thank you all. That was a really informative presentation, a lot of information. So there's a few questions here that are coming through. So thank you all for putting them in the chat. Also, as a reminder that this webinar will be available on our YouTube channel tomorrow. So it's okay. It will be recorded and accessible for all. But yes, let's go ahead and get started, moving to the Q&A portion. And this question, I know, Patricia, you just did a lot of talking, but I think it would be a good starting point. If I am licensed in a U.S. jurisdiction that doesn't currently accept this MRA, is there another way for me to get licensed in Canada or Mexico?
Yes, there is, in the sense of you could get licensed in a jurisdiction that is a participant. You will have to meet, of course, all the requirements that jurisdiction has to get reciprocity, and then you would be able to participate to benefit from the agreement.
Yeah, thank you. And also, I know your slide also contained a list of jurisdictions that are accepting that, so that also is available on the NCARB website. Another question we have here for Luis Enrique. I obtained my license in Mexico a long time ago, but have lived outside of Mexico for over 20 years. How can I document my professional activity?
Well, it's not easy the question, but I think that you can contact peers with the CONARC, and they can doing a good job to answer any question. First, remembers that the Mexican architects that have a professional license in Mexico, it is required to first obtain the national certification. But in case that you are living in United States and don't have any job or any practice in Mexico, we need to study any case for to show how is the best way to conduct the solicitants. And for foreign architects that is from United States and Canada, they can apply for the process directly.
Thank you. And then shifting gears slightly, Christy, there's been a few questions in the chat asking about Quebec specifically, and if there are any province-specific requirements in addition to completing the MRA. Specifically, a lot of people want to know if Quebec still requires the applicant to speak French.
Yes, it's a good question, Rishon. And certainly if you are successful through the trinational process, when you, I did say that you can, you're eligible to apply for license in any one of the 11 jurisdictions. We accept the trinational process. However, you really should check to understand what additional requirements may be in place. And these are not requirements that are just on top of the trinational agreement. These are for any domestic applicant as well. And so for Quebec, absolutely, there is a French language proficiency test. and that is through Quebec government. So that is something that you would need to be able to demonstrate proficiency in French language. And there's a few other requirements within other provinces. Some may have like I'll call it a professional practice course, or maybe a module that you may have to do in addition to the licensure. Obviously, there's an application process. We all have continuing education requirements. Once you are licensed, you would have to maintain continuing education. Some of the provinces as well, including Ontario, even if you were to receive a license, if you want to practice architecture in Ontario, meaning to offer services to the public, you would need what's called a certificate of practice. So there's one additional step that you need to go through, and with that, you need professional liability insurance. So there are a few additional pieces that are requirements for anybody who's becoming licensed. So I would encourage you, again, if you're selecting or you're specific about a jurisdiction, to look into what those requirements might be.
Thank you, Christy. And Patricia, I'm not sure if you had additional information to share on the professional activity documentation piece.
Yes, I'll actually address a couple of things. I'll add to a couple of things that Christy and Luis Enrique mentioned. First, just like Canada, they are not unique. Our jurisdictions also have their own additional requirements. It really varies from nothing else to, in addition to having the NCARB certificate, maybe just nothing else and having your documentation transmitted to that jurisdiction, to a jurisprudence exam that you may have to complete. Or, for instance, we are lucky to have California as part of the participants, but they do require the supplemental exam for everyone, domestic and international. So that would be what we call additional requirements. When you read that, it means the same thing for Canada and the US, is that jurisdictions may have an additional application form or some other documentation that you may need to show, just like a domestic architect. And regarding the experience, one of the changes that we're very excited about is that before we required 10 years of experience in the home country, and now that the number of years has been reduced, but not only to 5. We understand that a lot of people, let's say they started in Mexico, or it could be the opposite direction, but they started in Mexico, they graduated, maybe worked a couple of years, and then they moved to the United States and have been here for 20 years, just like the person who was asking the question. So to be eligible for the MRA, you will need at least 2 years of having worked in Mexico, for instance, if you're in that direction. So in the home country, 2 years. But the projects that you use for your documentation in the dossier can be from any of the countries, because what we find it really helpful to see what you are doing now and maybe not 20 years ago, unless you want to demonstrate your competency that way, but you could potentially use projects for this person would be in the US.
Yes, thank you for clarifying that. And actually, another follow-up question to what you were saying earlier, Patricia. When someone is documenting their experience, can you expand a little bit more on the definition of what having responsible control means?
Yes, it varies per country, so I'm very tentative of answering for everyone, but it is in the United States, it would be the architect of record. It is that person that ultimately signs the stamps, the drawings, and is responsible and liable for anything that happens in the project that they are working on. And I believe, Christy, probably very similar to you and Luis Enrique in that sense.
Yeah, for sure, Patricia, that's a very, it's basically means the level of supervision and control that you had. We also refer to it as personal supervision and direction in some of the jurisdictions in Canada. And so it really means that you were in control, you were responsible, you were taking full responsibility for the project, for the design, moving forward. So that's why there's 2 years have to be in the position of responsible control as an architect in your home jurisdiction.
Thank you for that clarity, both of you. And this next question for Luis Enrique is asking a little bit more about the licensure process in Mexico. So the question is, will a license obtained from Mexico work within all of the provinces?
Yes, of course. Remember that in Mexico, when you have the cédula profesional, you have the opportunity to work in all the country or all your life. And that's the principal value of the cédula profesional in Mexico. And of course, the different governments, of state governments, have a contract with the Mexican government, the federal government, and the cédula profesional from the different states are similar or have the same benefits or rights than the cédula profesional from the federal governments. That's the process normality. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. So this question is interesting because it's talking more about the physicality of being placed somewhere and then maybe working on projects elsewhere. So the question here is, do we need to be physically present in the home country to be eligible? For example, if I work remotely and work on projects in the home region, can I still be eligible? This question could be for anybody, but maybe particularly Christy, would you like to start here?
Well, if I'm understanding the question, Rashawn, like I think, yeah, you don't physically have to be in the home jurisdiction when you're applying through the national process. In fact, we recognize that some people have moved. Mobility is such that you may be in the host jurisdiction already. And that's partly why you're seeking licensure. So, you don't physically have to still be in the home jurisdiction for this to be eligible. I think hopefully Patricia and Luis Enrique, I described that correctly.
But yes, I always refer to please check with the jurisdiction where you're seeking licensure to see if they have additional requirements for the practice. Like Christy, you mentioned that there is an additional step if you want to offer services. So always be careful with that. But regarding the being physically present, it doesn't affect competency. And that's how we're trying to answer every question from the point of view of we need to know that you're competent, and that's all we need.
Yes, thank you. And this question actually will be for you, Patricia. There seems to be a lot of folks in the chat who are either pursuing another international program from NCARB. So the question here is, if I have already started NCARB's Foreign Architect program and paid some of the related fees, can I transfer over to the MRA? Would there be additional fees?
Well, I would say please contact our customer relations team, but keep in mind that the fees are not refundable. So yes, you will still have to pay the fees of the agreement. But a conversation with our team, if you're in the US, of course, would be helpful to see what are the next steps. However, regarding additional from the fees, yes, it's possible. The answer it's possible. I always want to caution a person who's trying to seek licensure in the US, have a plan of where you want to get licensed and where you might need to be licensed to make sure that the option you're choosing is the one that accommodates your future practice of architecture.
Yes, and to add a little bit to that too, when pursuing our programs, it's either one or the other, right? So I saw some overlap there, but if you're thinking about that one, or which path would be best for you. Okay, this next question, jumping back to Luis Enrique, can you tell us a little bit more about the CONARC certificate and its requirements for the program?
Of course. today, the CONAIR certificate is a voluntary process. Mexico, when you have a cédula profesional in the program, in the academic programs, you can show for all your clients different demonstrations to understand your level to acknowledgement and experience and abilities. And the CONAIR certification show to the social public or the potential clients the recognize of the Mexican architects. And that's why I think that it's important to understand that that this process is a voluntary process.
Thank you for that. Yes, thank you for clarifying that. And this question, I'll ask all three of our panelists, but approximately how long does the application process take from start to finish? I'll start with Patricia, followed by Christy, and then Luis Enrique.
Oh, I'm going to have to use the answer that I like the least, which is it depends. Of course, it depends on where you start from. For instance, if you start from Mexico, as Luis Enrique was saying, you need to have a CONARC certificate, and to get the CONARC certificate, you will have to demonstrate, fulfill the requirements, and the callouts are, Luis Enrique, please correct me if I'm wrong, but the callouts are twice a year, so I would always suggest going to FCARM's website and checking when that is happening. And once you have the CONARC certificate, of course, you can apply. It depends on how fast you apply and complete that. But then working with the dossier, it's where we find that most people take the longest in putting together, because it's not an easy. It is time consuming. You already have the experience. You have to look for the project. So it depends on how handy you have all the documentation, how much time you have to lay it out, and make sure that you are structuring the dossier correctly. And once it's ready, the review panel will take between 6 to 8 weeks to review the dossier. And here another, it depends. If they have any questions or they need additional information, it will go back to you, how long it takes, and coming back. And then the interview is scheduled based on availability. So I would say like another 2 months, unless you are a very busy person that cannot accommodate that or have a trip ahead. And once everything is done, you'll get, in our case, it would be an NCARB certificate, which is, if you have everything well, it doesn't take that long. And then you go to the licensing boards. They may have additional requirements. So again, it's on you how fast. So the timeline is really stretchy, but the core parts that are our organizations, it would be the review of the dossier, estimate, I would say 8 weeks, another 8 weeks to be safe on the interview, but a lot of it depends in the middle.
Thank you for that. That's pretty aligned, right? You're all three organizations.
Yeah, Rashawn, I really I wouldn't have it much else to add, and I agree with Patricia. Unfortunately, it does depend on on preparing the dossier in particular and how complete it is once you move to the next step. The only thing I would mention, just from if you're licensed in Canada and you are trying to achieve licensure through the trinational in one of the other jurisdictions, the only difference is the ROAC. There is no ROAC certificate. ROAC's not quite the same in terms of functionality as NCARB, and so and the CONARC certificate. So we don't have that process piece on our end.
Oh, and good point, Christy, because NCARB does have the NCARB certificate, so you also have to make sure that I'm talking from the point of view that you already have a certificate. If you don't, of course, you have to get there.
Right.
I think, Patricia, that in the case of the time of the process, the most important is the the volunteer of the people that want to obtain the certificate, the time and the interest, principality to participate in this program. And our experience is that many people start to make the process later let a small time or another in another experience they let too many times, and that's why the interest is the most important.
Thank you. So this, I believe, will be our last question since I want to be respectful of time. We're at the 4-minute mark. But one thing, Patricia, if you could just clarify, there was a lot of comments about the AREs popping up in the chat, but do you still need to take the ARE if you are pursuing this path?
No. So that one is a short answer. No, you don't. The ARE, AXP, nothing, and that part does not need to be completed.
And because you are fulfilling
you're already an architect at that point. So our programs recognize that you're already an architect and you don't have to repeat the licensure path that you already completed.
Perfect. Okay. That was, just wanted to make sure everyone's getting the information they need. So I know that we're coming up here on the end. And so thank you all for joining us. But I would like to ask the panelists to share at least one key takeaway that folks can have coming from this webinar today. So if you want to start with Luis Enrique, followed by Christy, and then have Patricia end, that'd be great.
Thank you. Yes, of course. I would like to convey the message of our president of the FECAR, Victoria Rodriguez, who points out that the future of professional practice is in the North America region is promising. Both recently graduated architects and those who are about to graduate will have ample option to practice in the countries that make up this mutual recognition agreement. The amendment of this agreement is relevant to the extent that this dissemination reach architects who intend to find new opportunities. Finally, I would like to thank NCARB and his entire team for the effort in making this session possible, with particular thanks to Mrs. Reason, of course, my dear panelists, friends, Patricia Ramallo and Christy Toll. Thank you very much.
Christy, last takeaway.
Sure. I think there's a couple of important takeaways from today. And I think, obviously one of them is architecture is a global profession. And, I think because even though the regulation of architecture and architects, it varies around the world, there are important similarities in approach. And even more specifically in relation to competencies to practice architecture in the primary interest of the public safety and also the well-being of societies. And so, for us, through respectful collaboration, it is obvious and evident it's possible to find ways to recognize and accept the process and the systems that other countries use to achieve and demonstrate those core competencies, and also to reconcile the differences. And so I think that's a really important takeaway. And if I could just take 1 second on a more personal note, I've been involved in this file for many, many years. And I just want to acknowledge that it has been such an ongoing pleasure to be involved. We've certainly had some tough discussions over the years. We've had lots of debate, and so also some problem solving to do, but it's always, and I say this sincerely, truly been done with, through respectful dialogue and a collegial and collaborative approach. So my thanks as well to my colleagues for this great agreement that we've been able to put together.
Thank you. Patricia.
Same thing for me. I would say it's been a pleasure. I am the newest one in this team of the people in front of you. Christy and Luis Enrique have been involved with this agreement since the very beginning. And I am kind of joining the last few years, but it's been such a pleasure. Same as you're saying, Christy, we actually try to understand our differences, and we actually learn from each other. It has been quite a process, very exciting. And I really hope this changes. And I think everyone who has worked in this agreement can say, we really hope you take advantage of the new changes and to find your way to become an architect in the country where you are trying to succeed. So hopefully this makes a difference.
Well, thank you all. Thank you all. Thank you all. This concludes today's webinar. I hope our panelists were able to answer all of your questions about our tri-national MRA. If you have any lingering questions, please feel free to reach out to either NCARB, ROAC, or COMPIAR individually. The contact information was shared earlier. And if you couldn't see the entire webinar, you'll be able to watch the recording again on our YouTube channel tomorrow. So thank you as always, stay in the loop, and we appreciate you taking time to join us today.